The champagne glasses sparkled under crystal chandeliers, but all I could taste was disrespect. I stood in the corner of my grandson's rehearsal dinner, 72 years old, wearing the same simple gray suit I had worn to my wife's funeral. My old pickup truck sat outside among the Ferraris and Mercedes like a confession of poverty. Victoria, my grandson's bride-to-be, stood near the champagne fountain in a dress that cost more than most people's cars. She looked at me like I was dirt someone had tracked onto her marble floors. "So this is the famous grandfather," she announced loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "Let me guess. Factory worker? Mechanic, maybe?" She laughed, and a few guests laughed with her. "It's adorable that Nathan's blue-collar family could make it tonight." The room went silent. My grandson's face turned crimson with embarrassment. 60 pairs of eyes stared at me, waiting to see how the poor old man would react to being humiliated by old money. I set down my glass of water and smiled calmly at this woman who thought she knew everything about me. "Would you like to see something interesting?" I asked quietly. "My study is 20 minutes away." She had no idea she had just insulted a decorated war hero, a test pilot for classified aircraft, and a secret millionaire who had sent her uncle to federal prison 30 years ago. Before I tell you what happened next, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me about a time someone underestimated you completely. My study was small, but filled with decades of memories most people would never believe. Victoria stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, clearly annoyed at being dragged away from her own party. Then her eyes found the wall behind my desk. Medals hung in neat rows behind protective glass, ribbons of red, blue, and gold, catching the soft lamplight. Her gaze stopped on the silver star, though I doubted she understood its meaning. "I earned that in Vietnam," I said quietly. "Our C-130 took enemy fire over the jungle. The engine caught fire with 12 airmen trapped in the cargo bay. I landed that burning plane on a dirt strip barely long enough for a bicycle." Victoria rolled her eyes with practiced dismissal. "Old war stories," she muttered. "My father builds actual companies. That is real success in the modern world." I reached past her and pulled a framed photograph from the shelf. In the image, I stood shaking hands with the President of the United States inside the Pentagon. Behind us, a dedication plaque displayed the name of a defense contractor. Victoria's face went pale when she recognized the company name. It was her father's company. "Your father and I have met before," I said softly, "though I suspect he never mentioned me." Nathan found me the next morning in my garage, sorting through boxes I had not touched in years. He had driven over early, still shaken from the confrontation at the rehearsal dinner. Victoria had refused to speak during the entire ride home from my study. Now my grandson wanted answers about the grandfather he thought he knew. I handed him a leather-bound logbook filled with flight records and technical notes from my years as a test pilot. His eyes widened as he flipped through pages documenting aircraft that officially did not exist. The SR-71 Blackbird, experimental prototypes that still remained classified decades later. "Grandpa," he whispered in disbelief, "you actually flew these?" I nodded and pulled out another document from the bottom of the box. My PhD diploma from MIT, earned through a special military program while serving active duty in the Air Force. Nathan stared at it like he was seeing me for the first time in his entire life. That evening, his phone rang with a number he did not recognize. Victoria's father, Vincent Harrington, wanted to meet with me privately. Nathan handed me the phone with trembling hands. Vincent's voice was smooth as oil and twice as slippery. "I know what you did in 1987, Colonel Brennan," he said. Then the line went dead. The encrypted email arrived at midnight on a secure address I had not used in 15 years. Someone had found it despite all my precautions. The message contained no words, only photographs that transported me back 30 years in an instant. Black and white images showed a younger version of me sitting before a congressional committee, my hand raised in oath. I remembered that day with perfect clarity. I had exposed massive fraud in defense contracts, billions of dollars stolen from taxpayers through fake invoices and phantom projects. My testimony sent 14 executives to federal prison. One of those executives was Victoria's uncle, Vincent's older brother. He died in prison 3 years into his sentence, broken and abandoned by his wealthy family. The next morning, Victoria appeared at my door without Nathan. Her eyes held none of the dismissive arrogance from the rehearsal dinner. Instead, I saw something much colder, something calculating and dangerous. "You destroyed my family once, Colonel Brennan," she said, her voice flat as a blade. "My uncle died behind bars because of your testimony. My grandmother never spoke again after the trial." She stepped closer until I could smell her expensive perfume. "You will not do it again." Nathan called me 3 days before the wedding, his voice cracking with confusion he could not hide. He had found bank statements in my desk while searching for old family photographs for the reception slideshow. The numbers made no sense to him, no sense at all. Millions of dollars sat in accounts I had never mentioned to anyone in my family. Patent royalties from aerospace innovations I had developed during my engineering career after leaving the Air Force. Licensing fees from technologies used in every commercial aircraft flying today. I had been quietly wealthy for decades while living modestly by choice. I drove my old pickup truck and wore simple suits because money had never defined my worth. Most of my fortune went to veterans' charities, scholarships for military families, and anonymous donations to hospitals across the country. Nathan could not understand why I had kept this secret from everyone who loved me. That evening, Victoria's attitude toward me changed completely and suspiciously. She became warm, friendly, and curious about my past. She asked about my military service with what seemed like genuine interest. Then she casually mentioned my old files from the Air Force days. Her eyes flickered toward my study door. I smiled and changed the subject, but I understood everything now. My old Air Force buddy Frank Torres called from Washington the morning after the wedding ceremony. Frank had risen through the ranks to become a Pentagon Inspector General, responsible for investigating fraud and corruption in defense contracts. His voice carried the gravity of bad news as he delivered his warning. Vincent Harrington's company was under federal investigation for billing fraud, the exact same schemes I had exposed 30 years ago, happening all over again. The investigators needed my original files from the 1987 case desperately. The evidence I had preserved could prove a pattern of criminal behavior spanning generations of the Harrington family. Frank asked me a question that made my blood run cold in my veins. "When exactly did Victoria start dating your grandson?" I checked the calendar against the investigation timeline he provided. Nathan and Victoria had met at a charity gala 6 months ago, exactly 3 weeks after the federal investigation officially began. Their engagement came impossibly fast. Their wedding even faster. The timing was not coincidental at all. Victoria had not fallen in love with my grandson. She had been sent to infiltrate my family and find the evidence that could bring down her father's empire. Nathan was not her husband. He was her assignment. The prenuptial agreement arrived in the mail from Victoria's lawyers as a courtesy copy for family records. I read every word 3 times, my military training helping me spot what any civilian would miss completely. Buried deep in the legal language was a clause giving Victoria access to all family documents and records in case of divorce or death. She could legally demand any papers stored in family properties, including my study. I drove to Nathan's apartment that afternoon and found him defensive before I could even speak a single word. Victoria had prepared him well for this exact conversation. She had warned him that I might try to interfere in their marriage, that I was paranoid and controlling in my old age. When I showed him the suspicious clause in the prenuptial agreement, he shook his head sadly. "Grandpa, you are seeing conspiracies everywhere," he said. "Victoria loves me. Her family lawyers just wanted standard protections for their assets." I left without arguing further because the rift between us had begun, exactly as Victoria had planned from the start. That night, I checked my study and found subtle signs of disturbance everywhere. Books slightly out of place, file drawers not quite closed properly. Someone had been photographing my documents. Vincent Harrington invited me to lunch at his private club, a place where membership cost more than most family homes. He wore a smile that never reached his cold eyes as he slid a thick envelope across the white tablecloth toward me. Inside, I found a cashier's check for $10 million, more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. "Consider it a gift," Vincent said smoothly, "a token of appreciation for keeping certain historical matters private. Destroy your old files, enjoy your retirement in comfort, and everyone benefits from the arrangement." I pushed the envelope back toward him without touching the check inside. "My integrity is not for sale," I replied calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. Vincent's smile hardened into something ugly and threatening. "That is unfortunate," he said quietly. "Nathan's new position at Harrington Defense might become redundant soon. Budget cuts, you understand. These things happen in the defense industry." He stood and buttoned his expensive jacket slowly. "Think carefully about your grandson's future, Colonel. He has a wife to support now." The threat was perfectly clear. They had positioned Nathan for months, giving him a job specifically so they could take it away. I made 5 phone calls that night to men I had served with 40 years ago in situations most civilians could never imagine. By the following evening, they sat in my living room like a council of war. Frank Torres from the Pentagon Inspector General's office, Judge William Callahan from the Federal Appeals Court, Marcus Webb, now CEO of a major aerospace company competing directly with Harrington Defense, Colonel James Okonkwo, Pentagon advisor on military contracts and procurement, and Samuel Reeves, retired CIA analyst who still consulted on domestic security threats for various agencies. Together, we represented decades of service and connections that Victoria's family could never imagine or overcome. Samuel spoke first, laying surveillance photographs on my coffee table for everyone to examine. Images showed Victoria meeting with known corporate spies in parking garages and hotel lobbies. Financial records documented payments from shell companies that traced back to Vincent's network. "She has been under observation for 2 years, Samuel explained. "We knew she would eventually target you specifically. The wedding was their way into your protected files we need to bring down the entire criminal network. My friends had let Victoria marry my grandson because they needed her close." Nathan called me at 2 a.m, his voice shaking with confusion and fear he could not hide. He had woken to find Victoria missing from their bed without explanation. Following a hunch, he checked the garage and found her searching through boxes I had stored there years ago. She was looking frantically for a specific metal box, one she had clearly been told about in advance. When Nathan confronted her about what she was doing, Victoria's composure shattered into pieces. Tears streamed down her face as she claimed her father was threatening her, forcing her to spy on our family against her will. She said she loved Nathan genuinely, but had no choice in any of this. Vincent would destroy everyone she cared about if she ever disobeyed his orders. Nathan wanted desperately to believe every word she spoke. Every tear tugged at his protective instincts, awakening his desire to save her from danger. He called asking what we should do, whether we should help her escape her father's control forever. I listened carefully to his description of her trembling voice and desperate pleas. Every detail matched the training profile Samuel had shown me perfectly. Victoria had been taught to manipulate emotions with surgical precision, but I could not tell Nathan that truth yet. A private investigator delivered his report to my study 3 days later, confirming my worst suspicions about Victoria. The woman who married my grandson did not actually exist. The real Victoria Harrington had died in a car accident at age 7, 30 years ago in another state. Her identity had been stolen and given to another child entirely. A girl named Alexandra had been adopted into the Harrington family and raised specifically for this purpose. Alexandra had been trained as a corporate spy from childhood, a weapon designed to infiltrate families and extract sensitive information without detection. She had done this before with other targets, leaving a trail of broken marriages and stolen secrets across the country. I arranged to meet her alone at a coffee shop far from Nathan's knowledge or suspicion. She arrived expecting another confrontation about her midnight search through my garage. Instead, I slid a photograph across the table between us. An old picture showing a little girl named Alexandra standing beside Vincent Harrington at her adoption ceremony decades ago. "I have known who you are since the day Nathan introduced us," I said quietly. "The question you should ask yourself is this: if I knew the truth, why did I let you marry my grandson?" Alexandra recovered from her shock faster than I expected, her training taking over almost instantly. Within seconds, her expression shifted from fear to cold calculation, and she leaned forward with a smile that belonged on a completely different person. "You have made a serious mistake, Colonel Brennan," she said softly, all pretense of warmth vanishing from her voice. "I have photographs suggesting you had an affair during your military service. Fabricated, of course, but convincing enough to destroy your late wife's memory forever. Everyone who loved Eleanor will believe you betrayed her throughout your marriage." The threat hit exactly where she intended it to land. My wife Eleanor had been my anchor for 50 years of life. The thought of her memory being tarnished by manufactured lies made my hands tremble with barely controlled rage. Alexandra saw my reaction and pressed harder immediately. "Give me all documents from the 1987 investigation," she demanded firmly. "Every file, every note, every piece of evidence you possess. Do this and the photographs disappear forever without anyone seeing them." I had no choice but to agree to her terms. That night I handed over boxes of files to her waiting car outside. But I had already made copies of absolutely everything important. Nathan appeared at my door the next morning, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes burning with unexpected purpose. He had not slept at all that night. He had spent the entire time reviewing everything I had ever taught him about reading people and recognizing deception in their words and actions. Now he sat across from me with his phone placed deliberately on the table between us. "I have been recording Victoria's conversations for 3 weeks," he said quietly, meeting my eyes with new understanding. "I know about Alexandra. I know about the documents she has been stealing. I know she has been manipulating me since the very first day we met at that charity gala." Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I had to steady myself against the chair to stay upright. My grandson had inherited far more from me than I ever realized. He had been pretending to side with Victoria while secretly gathering evidence of his own all along. Grandfather and grandson had been running parallel operations without either of us knowing about the other. But Nathan's expression darkened considerably as he continued speaking. "There is a serious problem, Grandpa," he said gravely. He showed me a surveillance photograph taken outside his mother's workplace. 2 men in dark suits watched her from across the street. The kidnapping attempt came 2 days later without any additional warning. My daughter Caroline was leaving her office building after a long day when 2 men approached her, claiming to be federal agents who needed her immediate cooperation. Caroline had inherited my suspicious nature, along with her mother's quick thinking under pressure. She demanded proper identification while stalling for time and slowly backing toward the security desk in the lobby. The men grabbed her arms roughly, preparing to force her into a waiting van parked at the curb. Then 3 of my Air Force contacts appeared from seemingly nowhere at all. Marcus Webb and his personal security team had been watching Caroline around the clock since Nathan first showed me the surveillance photograph. The attempted kidnapping ended with 2 men fleeing desperately into traffic and my daughter safe, but badly shaken in the building's security office. We had captured the entire incident on multiple security cameras, clear evidence of criminal conspiracy at the highest levels. But Samuel Reeves delivered grim news that same evening when we gathered. Vincent Harrington had federal judges on his personal payroll, men who would dismiss evidence and bury complaints without hesitation. The law could not help us through normal channels this time. The congressional subpoena arrived by special courier at my home. I was ordered to testify at a closed hearing regarding ongoing investigations into defense contractor fraud spanning decades. Victoria's father had arranged the entire proceeding himself, using his considerable political connections to create an official platform for my complete destruction. His lawyers had prepared forged documents suggesting my 1987 testimony was entirely fabricated, that I had been bribed by competing contractors to frame innocent executives for crimes they never committed. Samuel obtained a copy of their planned attack through intelligence channels I chose not to ask about. They intended to discredit me completely and permanently, to transform a decorated veteran into a disgraced liar, whose evidence could never be trusted in any court again. But Vincent Harrington had made one critical miscalculation in his elaborate planning. He assumed I would appear alone before the committee, armed only with old files and fading memories of events from 30 years past. Instead, I arrived at the Capitol building carrying recordings that Alexandra herself had unknowingly made. Conversations where she openly discussed the conspiracy, the document theft, and her father's entire criminal network in explicit detail. The congressman listened in stunned and complete silence as the recordings played. Alexandra contacted me secretly 2 days after the hearing concluded, her voice sounding completely different from before. Smaller somehow, stripped entirely of its usual calculated confidence and cold precision. She wanted to meet without Vincent's knowledge, somewhere safe where we could finally talk honestly with each other. I chose a veterans' memorial park at dawn, a place where my fallen brothers could watch over our conversation from their granite monuments. She arrived alone, looking exhausted and genuinely frightened for the first time since I had known her as Victoria. "I need to tell you something important," she said, her hands trembling around a paper cup of coffee. "I fell in love with Nathan for real somewhere along the way. Between all the lies and missions, he became the only honest thing in my entire life." She offered to testify against her father in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Nathan had followed us to the park against my explicit instructions and heard everything. Then Alexandra spoke words that complicated everything beyond measure. She claimed she was pregnant with Nathan's child. My great-grandchild was growing inside a woman trained to destroy my family. Vincent Harrington suggested a private meeting at an abandoned aerospace facility outside the city limits. The building had been a testing center during my Air Force days, a place where I had helped develop technologies that still flew in military aircraft around the world today. He claimed to want a peaceful resolution to our conflict, an exchange of documents for his daughter's freedom and safety. I knew immediately it was a trap designed to eliminate me permanently. The location was too perfect for an ambush, too isolated for witnesses, too full of shadowy spaces where fatal accidents could happen without anyone knowing the truth. But I also knew this confrontation had become inevitable between us. Vincent needed to face me personally, to prove to himself he had finally defeated the man who destroyed his family 3 decades ago. I wore a wire hidden carefully beneath my old colonel's uniform, the same uniform I had worn when I testified against his uncle in 1987. My Air Force brothers positioned themselves strategically throughout the abandoned facility, invisible guardians watching through sniper scopes and monitoring radio frequencies for any sign of trouble. Whatever happened inside that crumbling building would be recorded, witnessed, and remembered by people who would ensure justice prevailed. Vincent stood alone in the abandoned control room, surrounded by dust-covered equipment and faded safety posters from another era of aerospace development. He looked older than his photographs suggested, worn down by decades of maintaining elaborate lies and managing his sprawling criminal enterprises. His first words were not what I expected to hear at all. "I have something to tell you about your past, Colonel Brennan," he said with a strange and unsettling smile. "Something that will change everything you believe about your own family history." He claimed I had fathered a son during a brief wartime relationship, a child I never knew existed at all. That secret son had supposedly grown up to become Vincent Harrington himself over the decades. According to his elaborate story, I was his biological father, which made Alexandra my great-granddaughter by blood. The marriage between Alexandra and Nathan would therefore be completely invalid, a union between close blood relatives that violated both law and nature. The revelation was carefully designed to destroy Nathan emotionally, to shatter his love into shame and horror and disgust. I watched Vincent's eyes carefully as he delivered this devastating claim, searching for any signs of genuine belief in his own words. The DNA results arrived within 72 hours, expedited through Samuel's intelligence contacts at government laboratories. The tests proved conclusively and beyond any scientific doubt that Vincent Harrington and I shared absolutely no biological connection whatsoever. His dramatic revelation had been nothing more than a psychological operation, a desperate final attempt to break my spirit through false family bonds. But the elaborate lie revealed something completely unexpected about Vincent himself. Samuel's analysts traced the source of Vincent's false beliefs to a deeper conspiracy that had shaped his entire adult life without his knowledge. Someone had convinced young Vincent decades ago that I was secretly his biological father. They had carefully nurtured his obsession with me over the years, transforming natural anger about his uncle's imprisonment into an all-consuming hatred that defined his existence. The manipulation began during the 1987 trials, when a rival defense contractor saw an opportunity to destroy 2 enemies simultaneously by turning us against each other forever. They fed Vincent lies about his parentage, knowing his quest for revenge would eventually bring down both me and the remaining Harrington empire. We were both victims of the same hidden puppet master, dancing to strings we never saw or suspected. The metal box Alexandra had desperately searched for contained far more evidence than Vincent ever imagined existed. I retrieved it from its true hiding place, a safety deposit box in a bank located 3 states away from my home. Inside lay 30 years of meticulously gathered evidence documenting a conspiracy that extended far beyond the Harrington family alone. Dozens of defense contractors had participated in systematic fraud against the United States government, stealing billions of dollars from the Pentagon through interconnected shell companies and elaborate fake subcontracts spanning decades. Vincent's empire was merely one tentacle of a massive criminal network that reached into the highest levels of the American defense industry itself. I had been gathering this evidence slowly and carefully for 3 decades, waiting patiently for exactly the right moment to expose everything at once. Partial revelations would have been buried or discredited by powerful interests protecting themselves. Only a complete and simultaneous exposure documented beyond any possible denial or legal challenge, could bring the entire criminal network down at the same time. Alexandra and Nathan sat beside me as I explained the true scope of what I had discovered over the years. Their faces reflected the same shock I had felt decades ago when I first understood what we were fighting. Samuel delivered the most chilling discovery yet during our evening briefing session. My name appeared on a classified list of witnesses marked for accidental death by unknown parties. The kill list had been circulating among certain corrupt defense contractors for approximately 18 months, according to intelligence sources. 3 other names on that same list had already died under suspicious circumstances. Victims of car accidents that were too convenient. Heart attacks in otherwise healthy individuals. A house fire that investigators had ruled accidental despite obvious evidence of arson. I recognized 2 of the deceased immediately as fellow whistleblowers from the 1987 congressional hearings. Someone was systematically eliminating everyone who knew the full truth about the defense fraud network before they could testify again. Time had completely run out for careful and methodical planning. Alexandra overheard her father discussing my elimination during a phone call she was never supposed to witness. Vincent spoke casually about timing and methods for my murder, treating my death as merely a logistics problem rather than a moral decision requiring any consideration. She faced an impossible choice that would define her forever. Warn me and lose everything she had ever known, or stay silent and let the only family that had ever truly accepted her be destroyed. Alexandra called me at 3 a.m. with recordings of her father's entire criminal network captured on her phone. Phone conversations between corrupt executives, financial documents proving decades of fraud, encrypted communications that demonstrated everything we had suspected and much more besides. She had chosen her new family over the one that raised her as a weapon, knowing her father would never forgive this ultimate betrayal. The FBI moved simultaneously across 12 different states, executing warrants and arresting executives who had long considered themselves completely untouchable by law. Vincent Harrington escaped the initial raid somehow, fleeing with a small team of loyal security personnel still devoted to him. His empire crumbled within hours as former allies rushed desperately to cooperate with federal investigators, each one hoping to reduce their own prison sentences by exposing others in the network. Alexandra testified before federal prosecutors while visibly pregnant with Nathan's child growing inside her. Her testimony was detailed and devastating, delivered without shedding a single tear despite the enormity of what she was doing. She had become something entirely new, neither the trained spy nor the frightened victim, but a woman who had finally chosen her own path forward. Vincent took hostages at my old Air Force base, the same facility where I had tested experimental aircraft during the height of the Cold War decades ago. He had slipped through security using credentials that should have been revoked years earlier, undeniable proof that his corruption had infected even military systems meant to protect the nation. 6 civilian contractors became his prisoners, held in a hangar where I had once prepared for missions that still remained classified top secret. His demands were brutally simple and non-negotiable. He wanted me to come alone and completely unarmed, ready to finally face him without the protection of my powerful friends watching over me. The FBI tactical teams prepared detailed plans for a forced entry and rescue operation, but the base layout made such operations extremely dangerous for the hostages. Too many places where prisoners could be hidden from view. Too many ways for the situation to end in tragedy for innocent people. I put on my old colonel's uniform for what might be the final time, every medal properly positioned in place, every ribbon correctly aligned according to military regulations. The uniform still fit perfectly, a small miracle given all the years that had passed since I last wore it. The hangar echoed with memories of decades past as I walked slowly through its massive rusted doors. Vincent stood in the center of the oil-stained concrete floor, surrounded by frightened hostages on their knees and the ghosts of aircraft that had been scrapped long before. He looked almost relieved to finally see me there, as if this exact confrontation was something he had anticipated and rehearsed his entire adult life. "You took absolutely everything from me," he said, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls around us. "My uncle who raised me like a father, my company that I built from the ashes, my daughter who turned against me for you, everything I ever valued." I stood before him without showing any fear, an old man in an old uniform facing consequences I had set in motion 3 decades earlier. "Your family stole billions from this country and its defenders," I replied quietly and firmly. "I simply made certain they finally paid for their crimes." We talked for nearly an hour, while FBI negotiators monitored every word through hidden microphones. Vincent revealed truths and lies so intertwined that separating them became nearly impossible, even for trained analysts listening. The arrests took months to complete across multiple jurisdictions. The trial stretched on for years as defense lawyers fought every charge with unlimited resources. The reforms to prevent future fraud took even longer to implement throughout the defense industry. Vincent Harrington received a sentence that would keep him imprisoned for the remainder of his natural life, finally facing justice for decades of crimes against his own country. His network of corrupt contractors faced similar fates in courtrooms across America, their combined sentences representing centuries of incarceration for crimes that had stolen billions from taxpayers. Alexandra testified in 17 different legal proceedings over the following years, her detailed inside knowledge providing crucial evidence against powerful men who had believed themselves permanently above the law. She and Nathan rebuilt their marriage slowly and honestly, without the lies that had poisoned its foundation from the very beginning. The pregnancy was real, and my great-grandson arrived on a beautiful spring morning filled with possibility and hope for the future. Nathan named him Thomas after me, though I protested strongly that the honor was far too great for an old soldier like myself. The baby's eyes looked up at me with innocent wonder. 1 year later, we gathered at the small church for young Thomas's christening ceremony. Alexandra held her infant son with a tenderness that would have seemed absolutely impossible from the cold woman who once threatened to destroy my beloved wife's memory forever. Nathan stood beside her with his hand resting gently on her shoulder, showing the easy comfort of genuine and hard-earned love between them. My daughter Caroline sat in the front row, still bearing invisible emotional scars from her attempted kidnapping, but stronger than ever for having survived the ordeal. I stood at the altar as an old man, in a simple suit, holding my great-grandson, as the minister spoke words of blessing and hope for his future. The congregation included faces I loved dearly and faces I had learned to trust through fire. A strange extended family assembled from terrible conflict and genuine reconciliation. When asked to speak, I talked about service and honor and the courage required to admit our mistakes and change. Alexandra wiped tears from her eyes as I publicly welcomed her into our family completely and without reservation. After the ceremony ended, I quietly signed documents donating my entire remaining fortune to establish a permanent foundation for veterans and their struggling families. True success was never about wealth or recognition. It was about lives changed and honor maintained. I placed my great-grandson's tiny hand against my distinguished flying cross, passing forward a legacy that money could never purchase.